pumped to have you guys on. I mean, the last we've got a good segue from the last panel. I don't know if you guys tuned in. Sabina, Julia, and JT. It was all about building community and like authenticity and the importance of that, engagement over followers kind of conversation. And I think this is a perfect segue because we had a few people asking like, okay, I've built my community. How can I drive retail sales now? Because as you guys know, 85 to 90% of revenue is going to end up coming from retail at scale. So I think it's a perfect segue, and we've got some heavy hitters on the call. So to jump into it, we've got David, founder, CEO, Dream Pops. Congrats on the Crunch launch, by the way, it's fire. Dillon, also in LA with David, co-founder, CEO of Chubby Snacks, America's favorite PB&J.
There we go.
And the ever so classy Tom, VP of Marketing at Goodwipes.
Thank you.
But no, so this is all about turning community into sales, being able to like harness the love that kind of your customers have for your brand and sending them into retailers to really move product. That's what we're going to cover today. We're going to get into a few like kind of terms, KPIs, things like that. If you guys say something that, maybe the general kind of CPG marketer may not know, I'm going to ask you to explain what that is. But Dillon, if you want to kick us off and give an intro, and then Tom and David follow suit.
Cool. I'm Dillon Ceglio, as Dillon also mentioned, co-founder and CEO of Chubby Snacks. Originally from New Jersey, been living in Los Angeles for the last 11 years. I started Chubby Snacks about almost 3 years ago, although I'll probably get into it at some point. We throttled the business a little bit, so I'd like to say that we're like really only like a little bit over 2 years old. But we sell superfood PB&Js. So really trying to modernize the peanut butter and jelly sandwich and really try to build the bridge between healthy ingredients and classic taste.
Tom?
Hello, Tom Spaven, VP of Marketing at Goodwipes. Goodwipes is a flushable butt wipe brand for grown-ups. That's right. I've been there for 1.5 years. My background is mainly big CPG in Europe and North America. So I was at L'Oreal, Bacardi for about 8.5 years, which is what brought me over to the US. You will detect a British accent probably, although some think it's Australian. And I got the bug for startups in 2021. I went to a tequila seltzer company called Volley. Shout out Chris and Camila, they're still going, doing pretty well. And I've been with Goodwipes for just over 1 year, just helping scale the brand, build long-term thinking, and just have a great time with it. So yeah, here we are.
I'm a customer of Goodwipes.
Excellent.
So I would encourage everyone to give it a try. It is life-changing, some might say.
Samples for everybody on the panel and at the summit.
Yeah. David.
Hey guys, how's it going? I'm David Greenfeld, the founder and CEO of Dream Pops. We've been building the brand for a little over 6 years. We started with an ice cream bar, after launched our bites, which are kind of like our take on the Nestle's Dib, and are just launching our Crunch, which is kind of like a better for you malted milk ball crunchy M&M. But what we do is we take cold classic desserts and we make them healthier, better for you, and make sure that they still taste great. So yeah, PB&J, butt wipes, and ice cream. I don't think that there's a better combo here. Excited to be here.
Fueling each other's business.
Yeah, I love it. David, we're gonna get into the Crunch. I have questions about it as it relates to shelf space. So I'm excited that you had the time to join us today. But I think to kind of get into the questions, there's a common misconception for folks outside of the CPG space of all I have to do is just get the buyer to love me and get on shelf and I've won and that's it. When in reality, getting on shelf, may not be the hardest part. Staying on shelf is the hardest part, right? And so can you guys talk about maybe the dangers of overexpansion? Maybe you're not ready for that Walmart nationwide rollout as a startup brand. Like you just want to roll out regionally so you can win there and then expand. This will be for everybody. So Dillon, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, it's expensive to get on the shelf in the first place, and it's in a sense even more expensive to support your launches into new grocery stores. So we really do try to take a pretty diligent approach to our growth, especially early on. I mean, our biggest constraint always has been just our ability to make enough sandwiches. And so we never want to put ourselves in a position where we're launching into a new region or a new grocery store where we don't have data on it. And we're lucky to have a direct consumer business when we first launched, where we actually were able to take that data and then apply that to our grocery store launches. I mean, we have ambitious goals of being, nationwide and, 20, 40,000 distribution points, but it really is important for us to really lean into what we know in terms of the little bit of data that we could collect. Obviously, we know retail is really difficult to collect data, but utilizing and harnessing the data that we collect online helps us really build around our opportunities into grocery.
Tom or David?
Yeah, happy to dive in. I think especially now and in the last few years, I've seen so many founders focus on door count, thousands of doors, huge opportunities at Kroger, Albertsons, Walmart. I think one of the things we learned both the hard way, we've had discos happen in the past, but more importantly, we've been chasing these milestones that if we had gotten, thank goodness we got the no, because we just weren't ready. I think a lot of times you forget that it's one thing to win 3,000 doors or 6,000 doors at a huge conventional retailer, but you're going to need to put marketing dollars to each of those specific accounts. So my recommendation is always we started in Bristol Farms and Erewhon and Gelson's, and you can build a huge business in the natural channel that doesn't require those slotting bets. And so you can track data. And once you have the ability to understand regional success and natural specialty, you can then take certain bets in conventional, but it takes a lot of time and it's so easy to get fixated on how many doors you're in, but I'd way rather be in 1/8 of the doors doing double the velocity all day.
Yeah, I mean, I completely concur with this. I mean, we have a unified KPI internally, which is same store sales with current assortment. And we have to protect that to begin with. If that's not increasing to the required levels, we don't push expansion. We definitely don't talk about line extensions. We all know it feels good, right? And everyone loves a LinkedIn boast about a listing, but you can't build a house that you can't live in, right? And it's there's plenty of time to grow and expand, and sometimes you've got to take it because you may have one shot, but supporting a small brand in national retail distribution you pretty much can't do it. I mean, it's not. Yep. If you're a startup, you can't do it. So you're going to have to place a bet on at least which markets to go into. But steady growth is the only way. And I think we're learning that with looking for funding, right? Investors are getting more and more scrupulous about looking at your organic sales, and there's no hiding place anymore. So I think it's great that we're talking about organic growth again. Yeah.
Tom, I think it's a good segue into. I feel like I know a few of the KPIs, either as a CPG investor or somebody who works with brands on a regular basis, but you mentioned same store sales. What are some of the other KPIs that you guys look at prior to evaluating cool, we're good to expand, or maybe, hey, let's focus a little bit more on this store and go from there. And then Dillon and David, feel free to jump in too.
So, I mean, it is all about that one KPI, which at the end of the day, it is shared between sales and marketing. So that's what's good about it too, right? You haven't got your commercial KPIs and your brand KPIs. There are some of those, of course, but if you have to start with a unified KPI, which is same store sales velocity. And we honestly spend most of the time looking at that. And I think when you know it's working when you have junior members of the team waiting on a Tuesday morning for the velocities to land, even if they're not even in the sales team. And you see these whoops are going around the office, and that's where you want to get to. You want to have a few unified, simple KPIs. Of course, there are different brands have different weightings on D2C, and there are so many great things to track on D2C, obviously. And we do look at those because it's a little barometer of longer term health, but you've got to identify and agree on which retailers are your priority and what the units per store per week are. And that's it, honestly. That is the one.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I also think it's worth kind of talking about the fact that not every grocery store is the same and you can't treat them all the same. We kind of try to tier out our grocery stores in terms of which ones will work really well for us, especially right now. We have automation coming into the mix later this year. which is going to drive a lot of opportunity for us, not only from an output perspective, but also to drive our price down to be able to compete a bit more in the market. And so right now, like we know we have a higher price point in the freezer aisle. And so we try to strategically choose markets and regions where we know that that price point might actually work for that consumer. And so you can get a little bit of data too from just like the average cart value of like that grocery store, or how much that grocery store essentially makes on a per year basis per store. There's enough data out there for us to be able to look at and actually make concise and strategic decisions about whether or not it's worth us launching that store today or potentially like a year from now.
Just to add to Dillon's point, in addition to the retail metrics, dollars per TDP, the velocities, units per store per week per SKU, the other thing that I think doesn't get talked enough about is how that product is getting to shelf via distribution, because a number of there are so many different distributors and ways to market. Certain retailers might require a DSD distributor, which is more expensive and more hands-on, which will continue to lower the margin. If you're using a Unify and a KE, each of those are going to have different costs and freight costs associated, whether it's FOB or delivered. And so just remembering, like, whether it's running a payback analysis if you make an investment in slotting, and then running the analysis on how much is it going to cost to actually get it to the shelf, in addition to all the things that Dillon and Tom mentioned.
Going down that path, David, and then we can come back towards how you all have built communities amongst Goodwipes, Dream Pops, and Chubby. How can brands, I guess, partner with retailers to like deepen that relationship? And what are some of the values that you can get out of investing in that retailer partnership?
I think there's a number of ways. A lot of retailers have venture arms and are actually making investments in brands. And if you can make that happen and it's an equitable deal and great for everyone involved, that works really well. Separately, some retailers offer loan programs. But I think the most important way is just building a real relationship with your buyer or category manager, because then when you have a retailer buy in or believe in what you're building and understand that you need to be in a certain place in the grocery store, or you'll need X amount of distribution or eye level placement, like that can really change the dynamic and the trajectory of your business.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, building relationships with buyers are so key, because there is obviously the data aspect of it, but there's also the relationship building aspect to it. And, David, I'm sure you're familiar with this, Tom, you too. Not every buyer is going to make a decision based off of the data. They make a lot of decisions based off of their own personal preferences, which, it's a hurdle to be able to get past that, especially if, you don't get FaceTime with a lot of buyers. But I also think, like, from a micro level, being able to show face in specific grocery store and like make relationships with the store level employees, although it's not very scalable, that does go a long way, because you get to learn a lot of insights about that specific chain and how they operate. And so if you know that, like, you're supposed to be in 180 out of 250 stores, and you show up at some of these stores and you realize that you're not even part of the planogram yet, there's a good chance that that buyer, or that store level employee could connect you with the right person to be able to make sure that you are getting put into the planogram, or you are getting the right placements, or your product is being bought again post that first free fill or whatever it may be. Again, not really scalable, but you do learn a lot of insights from being able to communicate with the people on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you guys as CEOs will have had more direct time with buyers, obviously, particularly starting out. And, as a marketer, I think it took maybe too long for me to realize that the start point is not your brand, right? The start point is what's keeping the retailer up at night, what matters to them, how you can make them more money. And like, it's still easy to slip into, oh, well, we're going to walk in and tell them our story. Like, they probably don't care, right? They probably don't need your brand as much as you need them in general. And just getting an understanding of not just what keeps the buyer up at night, but perhaps what keeps his or her boss up at night. And that comes over time with the relationship piece. You've got to get to know these people. At the end of the day, the numbers matter, but there are lots of other things, to your point, Dillon. Like, get to know the analyst, like build a relationship with one of their analysts, like go to an event, go for coffee with an analyst from a retailer. The amount of insight you can get from that is extraordinary. I mean, many of you, I think, know Sam, one of the co-founders of Goodwipes. He's brilliant at this, right? He's always on the road. He's always talking informally and formally with retailers, and you're just trying to find insight. But yeah, it comes from relationship building. It's at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could just add one point, when we were at Expo West, I remember going to one of the like the after show events, and she's not a buyer, but she's somebody that has a lot of influence in the decision making around brands in their chain. And I remember having a conversation with her, and she was like sitting at a table with like another brand or some group of people. And when I was talking to her, she was like, "Oh yeah, that brand's my favorite brand." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And she like very quickly, like after a conversation, like flew back over, and it was like they were all best friends. And then you go into that grocery store and you see that brand and they have the best placements everywhere. And it's like, yeah, does data matter? But like a lot of the data is actually coming from the relationships first. So you're getting the success from the relationship, and that in turn is then reflecting in your sales. And then obviously it's full circle at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
Not saying everybody can get that, obviously, but you strive for it.
So I think if
Also, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, you just do the right things and it'll come your way. But David, no, jump in.
Just gonna say a lot of these retailers, like they have golf tournaments, they have, different charitable organizations that they're aligned with. Most brands don't show up to that extra level and, contribute or donate product or ask so they can stock shelves. Going that extra mile really can pay off.
And I think like the importance of having a good retailer relationship can't be overstated. Now that you're on shelf, how are you getting people in there to know, buy my product? This is where I am. I'm in this aisle. Like, what are some of the strategies that you guys are using? Because I feel like in the past, and again, please feel free to provide input or pushback on this hypothesis. Partnering with an Ibotta and handing out paper coupons were kind of like the sole solution. And now that omni-channel has come to the forefront in the last, call it year and a half, 2 years, you now have this massive email list, this community on social media, you're partnering with influencers. Like, how are you guys using that to now drive in-store traffic? Because I think moving forward, that's really going to be the standard. But Dillon, if you want to start us off.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, my background was digital marketing prior to getting into Chubby. So, when we first launched the brand, I focused solely on just utilizing Facebook, Instagram for paid advertising. It did really well for us in the beginning, up until like the iOS changes. But as we started rolling into retail, the goal really was like figuring out how we can bridge the gap between digital and retail, obviously. And it's really difficult. There's no like, streamlined or seamless integration that you can just plug in and, have universal discount codes that's just going to be able to like provide a dashboard with the metrics. So you got to get scrappy. You got to figure out ways to like incentivize people. You got to figure out how to get in front of them. Obviously, we do a lot of like geo-targeted campaigns with like a rebate platform to be able to drive trial. But then once we collect that user's info, we throw them through different types of flows to be able to, inspire retention. Even doing like post-purchase free surveys too, even on a free item or like a rebated item. That gives us a lot of insights to be able to then figure out how to like make our next move. And then also just like meeting the consumer where they actually are. One of the cool initiatives we're doing this year is soccer tournaments. We've partnered with a soccer tournament organization that, on a weekend, specific weekend, they'd have like 250 to 300 teams, but 15,000 people come through. Those are all families essentially coming to, Sedona, Arizona for a soccer tournament. That gives us the opportunity to do like an activation there, obviously showcase our brand, but then also collect those consumers' information, because all those people are going back to their own regions or their own cities, their own towns, where we might potentially be in that grocery store. And so really like leaning into the fact that like through SMS, through email, through social, you could really like kind of build like a foundation and build like a team of boots on the ground that can potentially make action for you in those grocery stores. I mean, that's key. And it's really difficult to achieve, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, to chime in on that, I think there's a lot of resources that weren't available in the last 10 years that, whether that's organic content creation across all platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, creating virality or just presence or awareness. It's free. I think it's huge. And then you can definitely invest in paid marketing, which unfortunately I think is a bit overpriced and just isn't converting for wholesale specific brands like me and Chubby, like me and myself and Dillon. But where we are seeing a lot of success is, we're working with some field marketing teams to just get people to mass sample. And whether that's, having a couple tentpole opportunities. We're doing the Dear Media IRL Summit this weekend where we can get in front of 700 amazing folks. But then there's other music festivals, food festivals, walkathons. Very similar mindset to Dillon. Like, I really do believe, yes, you can cookie people, retarget them, have amazing email and SMS campaigns, but at the end of the day, you need to make an amazing product and just pass it to people at scale and have them consume it and fall in love with your brand. And doing that 50,000, 100,000 times is going to really eventually compound.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly, I mean, the first start point here is you have to have a product that people love. It's like such a duh moment, but when you think about turning community into sales, I feel like there's so much going on in my head. I feel like it's not going to come out of my mouth because there's so much here and everyone's just waiting. It's like, what is it? How do we do it? But like when Sabina was talking about literally turning community into sales, like the incredible stat that she gave when she was like, they literally asked their fans to go and buy the product at Sprouts, and then people got up and went out. Like, that's such an extreme example of a community, and that's, community is overused, right? I don't know a marketing plan this year that doesn't have the word community on there somewhere, and it's not something you can just turn on in a quarter. Like, you can't do that. It doesn't exist, right? The whole point of it is that it takes time to build relationships. You have to be patient, you have to be consistent, and all of it comes back to if your brand is in the right place and you know who you are and therefore how you can behave with respect to your audience, you've got more chance of building community, right? So really, there's a lot of hard work that has to happen in the back end. Shout out to all brand marketers. But at the end of the day, there is no silver bullet for turning community sales. Like, sampling looks different now, right? I think when we all think about sampling, we immediately think about people in store and just handing out products. And like, yeah, that's more expensive than it used to be. It's also worse than it used to be, right? How often do you just try and avoid someone in store because they have no charisma? You don't want to talk to them. You might be in a rush. Like, sampling looks different. I think we're going to talk about this in a minute, but you can use a retail channel as a sampling vehicle, right? And there's ways to do that now, which you couldn't do before. Shout out Visor. But there's you've got to kind of relax the rules around sampling and just think, how many products can you get into households so that people can just experience and enjoy a product, which in the case of Goodwipes, obviously, is more likely to happen in the privacy of your own home than directly in front of somebody. But I would say that it's the case with everyone. Everyone wants to use it however they want, right? So yeah, there's no silver bullet. I would say be patient, be humble with it, like listen to feedback and don't just go through the motions of whatever you did 3 years ago, or perhaps what worked for a giant brand you used to work for. Just focus on getting the product into people's hands in all innovative ways you can possibly do. And if you have a great product, then people are going to come back. So
yeah, and if I could just add to that too, like I think relatability really comes into it as well too, right? I think now more than ever, brand founders and just the teams in general are more outward facing to the consumer. And obviously with like the creator-led brands these days too. But I think like showcasing that raw, authentic self and like actually being able to relate to the consumer really does help like motivate people to make action for you. And I think your brand really needs to like elicit a response from the consumer too. Obviously, like as Tom mentioned, your product has to be dynamite. But at the same time, if that brand in some type of way connects with that consumer, they're more likely to make an action for you. And I think that's a hard thing to accomplish, but you kind of can see if you have that relatively early on. And obviously you just like lean into that as much as you possibly can. Which I think a lot of these brands, David, you, myself, Goodwipes, obviously, like we're all trying to get in front of the camera more because we're finding that actually helps with the success of the brand.
Yeah, for sure. It was funny seeing Jake in an Uber. Like, he's the only person who can get away with it. He's like, oh, this is just what we do. Like, he broke all the rules of the panel, but it kind of worked. And that's right, because that's on brand for them, right? They've just opened the doors. Someone else, I think JT mentioned about CX. You can either see CX as just a kind of cog in the machine to deal with issues, or as a marketing channel. Like, it's so important for us, and you can turn the most angry people into the most ardent super fans of your brand because that's someone who's taking the time to actually talk to you. Like, how valuable is that now as a company? And it's just another channel, because you can literally create a story with a conversation with a customer that can become content, that can absolutely go viral. The word of mouth begins, and you just gotta omni-channel. Like there's no silver bullet, but there is this alchemy that you can create at different times, and it varies year on year, right? And I mean, this doesn't fly in the boardroom, but I think you will all know what I mean. Like you can just feel it when it's working, because you can, your social media manager will be like flooded with, good, bad, and the ugly, and that's when something's happening, right? In week on week. And yeah, it's difficult to quantify it. It's difficult to quantify community to sales, and someone will one day create a metric for that, but you can just feel it when it's working, because that there's this momentum on the brand, and that people are engaging mostly in a positive way. So yeah, just don't ignore certain channels, I would say, and think of them as just functional. So yeah,
I think you guys touched on a few things that are relevant to the next question, which is, the customer service as a marketing channel, I think is a relatively new, maybe I'm the one in the dark, but I think it's a relatively new concept, using it that way, and then building in public, right? Like Jake for Midday, or Dillon, I know you do it, and David, I know you do it, going into the store and meeting the buyers and meeting the people who work there, and using it as content to build that relatability and to build that community. How do you see kind of shopper marketing in general, which is what I would classify this kind of concept under, changing over the course of the next 5 years? Because I think all of that has happened in the last 1 to 2 years, and it's been monumental shifts to where the brands have a little bit more power in terms of being able to use their own channels to drive retail traffic versus, kind of being at the mercy of maybe larger distributors or firms or retailers and things like that. So would be interested to hear kind of how you think the industry is going to change moving forward. David,
Yeah. So in Dillon, just to touch on it, is the question behind the scenes, organic, authentic content, and then versus shopper marketing, like, Instacart, citrus ads, spending in marketing dollars, and how they kind of tie in together? Is that kind of the question?
So yeah, I'm actually, and feel free to push back on this. I would classify kind of content driven to get the shopper into the store. And if you do have some sort of trackable, either link or aspect to it, I would qualify all of that under the umbrella of shopper marketing. And just interested to hear, which could be a shift, right, in the next 5 years that happens, to where we start using organic content to drive folks into the store that we can track. So I'm just interested to hear, like, maybe what strategies you're using today, and ones that you think could be more impactful moving forward.
Yeah, I would say on the shopper marketing front, like, I'm just very bullish that a lot of the performance marketing dollars that were going into Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest are now moving into retail media networks. And I think we're all seeing that. So like, whether that's spending on ads on Instacart, on GoPuff, on DoorDash, Fresh Direct, like there's this amazing opportunity to do sponsored search and to attack advertising where people are already showing intent on Facebook and Instagram. People are scrolling. When someone goes into an e-grocery marketplace, like, there's intent to purchase food or beverages. And so you have a really high probability of converting. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity to tap into that shopper marketing piece. When it comes to the other piece, which is creating content with that relates to that specific retailer, also super powerful. Like, I love the videos where you have somebody who's in whether that's Bobby, who's doing a ton of content in the grocery stores, Bobby Parrish, and showing specific brands that he loves at Costco or Target. I think those types of brands really do drive sales, and also just showing founders meeting with buyers behind the scenes is really impactful. And it's not just another glossy photo of a product shot that's like, here's where this product's available. So I think both are just, what you need to invest in if you want to stand out and actually get people to listen and pay attention.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think even those platforms that you mentioned, DoorDash, GoPuff, I think they're great opportunities to also drive trial too. We just launched on a few of them, and we're selling individual sandwiches there. We've never sold individual sandwiches outside of some one-off opportunities, but I think that also helps with being able to then help that consumer find us in the grocery store and buy our full-size pack, for instance. And so I think we're constantly leaning into ways that we can make it incredibly easy and convenient for consumers to try us at the lowest price, knowing that assuming that they like the product, they'll essentially find us in the grocery store at some point. And, kind of to David's point with the content, I think, continuing to show that relatability, that raw, authentic self, or in association to your brand is going to be so important. And just really being transparent. We've tried to make a habit of like posting on social as well as LinkedIn about just like the behind the scenes of like what it takes to be able to scale up all of our ingredients in our product. And it just has a really good like response from followers and consumers, because they want to know that you're putting in the effort, you're trying to solve problems, and you're ultimately staying true to your pillars, right? Health and wellness is our pillar, or is a big part of our company. And so making sure that we're putting the right ingredients into scale also aligns with like what we stand for essentially. And I apologize for my light going out. WeWork isn't really the most convenient place apparently.
No, it's okay.
Just to add one final point, I think that that's our superpower as startups. Like a Coke exec can't be like, hey, we mislabeled our Coca-Cola bottles, like ha ha ha, and then post about it, right? Like, but we can all be, have a little humor and realize, man, this is so challenging. Here's some ice cream that melted, or here's a chubby sandwich that didn't make it to the shelf and fell off. Like that's your true differentiator that people really want to hear about, because tens of thousands of people who are attending Expo West can all relate to it.
Totally.
Yeah, how many times has the word authentic been used today already? But vulnerable as well. Like I think it's increasingly okay to, and in fact encouraged, right, to show your vulnerability, and it just makes you more human as a company, which at the end of the day is the big differentiator versus a big shiny corporation. So, I think customers are very forgiving, right? If they like you, they'll forgive your imperfections and come along for the ride. And that's such a, I think that's been a real big shift in the last few years, which obviously it's not news to any of you, but it's really interesting to see.
Yeah, I think it's endearing.
I definitely agree. And Dillon, you brought up a point about just like customer service and how like, and I think Tom, you even touched on it, where you have like an angry customer who then becomes like a loyal fan. And I think like, obviously, again, that's not really scalable, I guess, in a sense, but sometimes like we've had like customers reach out and they've had a bad experience, which is understandable. And then they find out that like, well, my business partner, Brett, who's a co-founder, is responding to the emails because we still want to kind of showcase that, level of personality or, personal touch. But then he'll say like, oh, sorry, like we're only a two-year-old company. And their response, like most of the time is like, oh, I thought you guys have been around for like 10 years, 20 years. And I'm just like, wow, like, man, the level of disconnect is just like so great. And so like, I don't know, really leaning into that vulnerability aspect of it is really important, because you kind of take for granted, like everybody knows your story, when in fact, most people don't. But when they find out just a little bit of it, or just like how young you are as a company, or like just some of the struggles that you go through in order to be able to like get your products on the shelf, there's just like a level of sympathy, I guess, that comes from the consumer that just like better relate with you. And I guess they kind of take your brand in stride and, kind of want to be a champion for the brand in a sense.
Totally.
Yeah. Great point, Dill. So that was all the questions I had. We have questions from the attendees, so we're gonna pivot to those a little bit. Dillon, I had mentioned this topic to you prior and somebody asked it, so I'm happy they did. You guys you partner with influencers, you also have influencer investors into your company. I feel like a lot of folks have been trying to crack, how can we work with influencers to drive retail traffic? One, have you guys gone down that path of, folks going in and creating videos for you and saying, hey, they're at Whole Foods, go buy it? And two, how do you gauge the efficacy of those types of campaigns?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I can't tell you how many times somebody's come up to me and be like, oh, like this celebrity should be invested in your company, or this celebrity or athlete should be invested in your company. I'm like, yeah, that sounds great in theory. Then contract comes around and they want half the company to do essentially zero. And so it's hard, right? Like, David, you're very familiar with this in terms of like how to negotiate these kind of relationships. Some of them work, there's no doubt. I mean, look at Olipop just this week with Camilla Cabela, I think her last name is. Anyway, they did like a great brand commercial, and it obviously just like made a rippling effect across the entire industry in terms of how good it was. But that's a great opportunity to like kind of showcase our relationship with a brand and an influencer. And then there's, the goal is obviously to get action from that. But it is difficult. We have a couple of like celebrity influencers, and I think there's ways we'll eventually use them, specifically in like a rollout to like a Walmart or a Target, for instance. But it's very difficult to really track that because there really is no like direct correlation between what she puts out on Instagram and what happens in the grocery store the next day. You obviously want to hope for the best and you want to support what she's doing with the other intangibles that you're putting into work. But it is definitely very difficult to be able to track the success of an influencer to a brand.
Yeah,
I
and
agree.
go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Tom.
sure. Yeah, I mean, again, I keep coming back to this. Like, there's no formula for it, other than it's a really easy way to waste a lot of money really quickly. It can be, but it's also worked so well for so many companies and at different like levels of the kind of influencer scale, right? I think when you're small, like the best thing you can do is just to try and give products to people who you think best fit your audience or the top of your audience pyramid, and start sharing the love. And it's you can lose a lot of money very quickly with the kind of middle tier of it. And of course, everyone's looking for that perfect bullseye, macro influencer who really just has to be a massive fan of your company and has to be a friend. Like, otherwise, if it starts to get transactional, there's only one winner and it's not the company. So again, I just think it comes back to the authenticity. I think there's ways to approach influencer relationships where you can show vulnerability rather than try and show how buttoned up you are. And because the closer you can get to the person, the more they're going to give you. And it's really about investing the time in understanding who you are and therefore who your community are. And then it can really work because often it can be free. I mean, it really can. But then you've got to place a bet at some point, and that's a big decision for a company. And if you're going to partner with someone big, there's also risks associated with that. But yeah, this is
Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say you also got to add like the supply chain risk of creating a new limited time offer or a SKU. And I've heard horror stories of like an influencer collab where tens of thousands of units never sold. And so it's really hard to predict, especially I'd say it's very category specific. If you don't have the margin in place to do the right collab, it can really kill you. And then bringing that collab, I think if you have something really successful, I loved what Dillon did with that Nutella sandwich and other, even the chomps idea, like that's something that should launch in retail. But just being really careful with those bets because they could be 6 figures of supply chain investment that don't end up working out.
Yeah, if I can touch on that too, David, I appreciate it. I think for us, like the collabs is like a really big opportunity for us in the future because they're great LTOs that we could launch direct to consumer. Obviously, the goal is to sell out as quickly as possible, but then take that data and make data-driven decisions at retail. The TBH collab that we did, I mean, that was like one of the best things we could have ever decided on. I mean, we generated over like 10 million organic impressions off that campaign, mostly because of Noah Schnapp. But what that did was it created the opportunity for us to essentially launch that product into retail in the future. We have buyers that saw that and we're like, oh my God, like we got to launch that as a seasonal product and like sign us up. But at the same time, like we're not ready to launch that yet. So that's also like to David's point, like you got to make sure you're not over your skis in terms of like committing to something that you can't actually promise on or deliver on, sorry. And then the Chomps one was great just because that was the April Fool's campaign. But the most important reason why we did it was because we wanted to prove that our consumers give us the permission to be able to step outside of just peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I mean, our goal for the next 3 to 5 years is really just focus on PB&Js. We think the sky is absolutely the limit in terms of how many we can sell. But at the same time, to be able to flex that, consumers are, already lining up for us to launch a, better for you Hot Pocket is pretty powerful. It allows us to be able to start, kind of taking our imagination and thinking of like, what can we fit into this, our patented cloud shaped sandwich ultimately.
And I think that all starts from just creating a community of brand fans out of the gate and just continuing to deliver, one, with your product, but two, with your experience of like the customer service, the marketing, the brand, all that stuff. And I think all 3 of you guys have done a really, really good job. So we talked about activating your community through the omni-channel, but we got a question about, how do retailers view the pros and cons of spending directly with the retailer, either through, the Kroger app versus other channels outside of it. Like I know Walmart's a big fan of working with influencers and things like that. And how does that affect the relationship with the retailer?
Yeah, I mean, I would just to jump in, I would say all the retailers have kind of their minimum bar of what's expected. If they're going to give you and allot you real estate, like you better put marketing dollars to work, whether that's through X number of promotions a year, spending on their retail media network, sponsored search, allocating influencer spend specifically to drive conversion, couponing, etc. So, I think it's fundamentally important that, you find a way to have a retailer by retailer promotional plan and marketing strategy. Back to our initial commentary in the beginning, if you launch 10,000 doors in 1 year and you don't have millions of dollars to allocate, it's a very low probability of being successful. And so making sure that there is a omni-channel marketing strategy in place for each specific retailer so that you're not discontinued in 12 months is essential.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's becoming, sorry, yeah, go ahead, Dylan, go
No,
ahead.
you shoot, Tom.
I mean, it's just gonna say, I mean, it's becoming one of the first lines in the budget now. It's not an afterthought. It's kind of your way of helping land the plane, not just because of the attribution and the performance, but because it's the cost of doing business now. And it's, you called it, David, it's actually sponsored search. Like it's not really brand media. Like you're just buying shelf space where people are shopping. I mean, and who doesn't want to do that? Like it's really hard to impact shelf position in store. It's inconsistent. Whereas you really can control that environment in the digital world. And it's a brilliant marketing channel, but you just got to call it what it is. Like you're buying shelf, you're getting in front of shoppers. That's it, right? But if that can help you land the plane and remain in that distribution and then fuel the business and help you plan for next year, like this is just part of the core plan now. And it's essential, and it's amazing how quickly it's grown. But yeah, we're definitely looking at it a lot.
Yeah, I think it just goes back into just like building that relationship with the buyer too of the grocery store. Like you want to prove to them that you're constantly putting in the effort in order to make sure that your sales are there, but also that you really care about that grocery store, that banner. They know that you're in other banners as well, and you want to make them feel special because ultimately they need to feel special in order to continue to represent you in a way in which you want them to. It's difficult to do, obviously, but trying to think outside the box in terms of like how you could be scrappy about a campaign for a specific banner really does go a long way. And I think it's just important for us to continue to think about how we can, kind of differentiate ourselves from everybody else.
That's a great point. So there's this kind of binary brand versus performance conversation, which I really don't love, because I think and actually believe that you have to build your brand everywhere, right? Like every touch point is a brand building opportunity and a sales driving opportunity. And just because it's a retail media buy, it doesn't mean you can't surprise and delight people and show up well. Particularly if you get into the display ads and all the rest of it. So think about everything as an opportunity to sell and say something about yourself and to bring people in. And then I think it becomes more palatable, right? And it becomes something that you look forward to executing, as opposed to moaning that you haven't got brand building dollars. And that's not the case. Like everything is a brand building dollar, right? Every deck you make, every meeting you go into is a brand building or a brand eroding opportunity. So yeah, that's how we see it.
Yeah, more so than ever. I feel like we touched on this in the beginning. Founders, employees are now becoming like one with the brand.
Yeah,
just working kind of behind the screen and behind the scene. Okay, we have 2 minutes left. Like this, I had so much more for you guys, but I think we had some great questions and you guys provided a ton of insight. If you could just go kind of around the table and share, where can people connect with you personally? And then where can people follow along with what you're building? David.
We could use some TikTok followers, so feel free to follow us on TikTok, Chubby_Snacks. And then my name is my Instagram and any other platform for the most part. Appreciate any follow. And I think for us, I'm going to continue to try to like kind of put ourselves in front of the camera more, because I do think that it's really important for us to showcase what it is that we're building. Tom and David can both follow up, but this is not easy. But having the opportunity to speak on platforms like this actually really helps with not only telling our story, but again, just kind of creating that relatability with the brand and the founders. And I think it's really important. So would really appreciate any type of follows and shouts. Thanks.
Yeah, and you can find us at dreampops.com, Dreampops on TikTok, Instagram, and then LinkedIn on my personal page. Always love connecting with other founders, and this is what it's all about: knowledge sharing and us competing against the big guys.
Yeah, at Goodwipes, all the socials, but give us a follow on TikTok. We think it's really funny and it deserves more views than it's getting. And yeah, to follow me on, love to chat on LinkedIn with all of you guys, and always open for a conversation. So yeah, appreciate it. Appreciate the chance to talk here, and great list of speakers. So thanks for letting me
Yeah, good
barge.
job, Dylan.
Yeah, and you guys are included in that great list of speakers.
Should I hope so?
Yeah, no, you guys did great. I'll connect all of you guys, but thanks again for jumping in. This was awesome. I think people hopefully got a ton from this. We'll re-recorded it, we'll reshare it. The next one's at 2 p.m. It's the future of retail. That one's going to be really interesting. Like I'll personally, well, I tune into all of them, but I'm like really excited to listen to that one. So 15 minutes, everybody can chill, relax. And then we've got another great one coming up. But guys, thank you so much.